Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Lusaka Avocado Multipurpose Cooperative Society. Today is our training day, and I look forward to hearing about all your questions and everything that you're doing. To the Lusaka Avocado Multipurpose Cooperative Society. Excuse me. Today. My apologies for that. One window opened accidentally. Today, we've got a talk on compost making. I, for one, am very excited about this. We do have some members of the technical committee with us today. We have Mr. Isaac Mbewe and Mr. Nkungulu. Mr. Chibesa, I will hand over to you to give an introduction. Thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you so much for giving this talk. At the end of the talk, Mr. Chibesa, we are going to have questions. So if anybody has any questions, please put your questions in the chat. If you can't access the chat because you're not joined by Gmail, please feel free to ask your questions on the WhatsApp group or on the Telegram group, and I will read the questions at the end. So over to you, Mr. Chibesa. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Kalinda, and good evening, fellow farmers. My name's Bonwell Chibesa. I'm a farmer based in Mpongwe. Now, before I became a farmer, when I left school at the Copperbelt University way back in 1997, I joined the ZRA as a tax inspector. I worked for a few years there, then I left to concentrate on farming. Then in between, I also went to a college in Masaiti and studied about agriculture. Currently, our farm is called the Fisabo Enterprises Limited of Mpongwe. So in addition to farming, I also do tax consultancy. We can move to the next slide. Thank you. Our learning objectives for today's topic of thermocompost is to produce an alternative to inorganic or synthetic fertilizers, which is cheap, is to produce, of a realistic quality, and is available. Secondly, to be stewards of waste as well as and turn it, that is waste, into wealth and health. The next slide. So the introduction. Compost is something most people have heard about, made or used during their lives, but few really know how to make it to a high standard. The compost would like to see people making and using should be of consistent quality and should be free of weed seeds and any pathogens. Next slide. What is compost? It is the aerobic decomposition by bacteria and fungi of a mix of organic material. This means that in the presence of oxygen, plant material will break down by the action of the bacteria and fungi. The next slide. There are many methods of making compost, but during this presentation, we want to concentrate on thermocompost. This method takes slightly more management and diligence than other methods, but it is fast. Approximately, it will take 8 weeks, the compost will be ready, and will be weed seed and pathogen free. Madam Kalinda, you can play the short video. In that video, that's my daughter. She was checking the compost heap. If you saw, there was even a vapor on top. That's why we are calling it thermocompost. So she was checking how hot it was. So what she was pulling was a metal rod, and that rod was quite hot. That's why our last comment was saying it's really hot. You can even cook shima. So as I said, there are other methods of compost. There's what is called anaerobic. This is where you dig a pit and you throw in your waste. When it's full, you fill it up. That is anaerobic. But in today's presentation, we want to focus on thermo, which is fast, as well as takes care of the weed seeds and is pathogen free. We can move to the next slide. So the size of the compost pile, the minimum thermal heap that should be made is about 1.5 meters cubed. If built smaller than this, you will not achieve the desired temperatures for the required period. Thus, a pile of 1.5 meters by 1.5 meters by 1.5 meters will ensure that the required volume for the required temperatures that must be attained. It is also small enough for a single person to work in a few hours. In a small scale farm or garden situation, it is also not too difficult to accumulate or gather enough raw material to build a heap of this size. Next slide. Then we'll come to the site of the compost. After you have selected the site, then you fix the pores in the measuring 1.5 meters by 1.5 meters, as I mentioned in the earlier slide. That is, all the four sides should be 1.5 meters long and height 1.52. Always the site should be near a water source. The next slide. You need the equipment or tools. The first one, you need 8 pegs or poles, each measuring 1.8 meters. Then you have the tape measure. Then you need 1 or 2 drums for water or a hose pipe. You also need a cane knife for reducing large pieces to manageable size. You need a pitchfork or garden fork. You need a pick and a spade or shovel. You need a wheelbarrow, though this one is optional, but if you have one, it will be ideal. Then you also need a 1.2 meter length of 8 gauge wire or a 10 millimeter round bar. Next slide. So choose a site which is near a water source, e.g. a stream or river, well, water tap or borehole. All the materials should also be kept at the compost site. Remember to keep the materials separate at the time of collecting. The next slide. The materials or ingredients which are required, you need green materials, brown material, nitrogen source, water, oxygen, microorganisms. In the next slides, I will shed more light on the materials. The next slide. So the green materials, this is a food source for bacteria because of the sugars contained. An important point to remember here is that if the plant material is cut green, then it should always be considered green, even if it has dried after cutting. Some good examples of green materials are grass, leaves, and weeds. Don't worry about seed. Then diversity of materials is always good. So for green materials, it's the things which when we do the pruning, for example, when we prune our avocado trees, when we prune our hedge, or we do the weeding, those will be considered as green materials, but you need to cut them in manageable sizes of maybe 10 to 15 centimeters. As you can see in the picture there, the lady, she's cutting the remains from sugar canes into smaller pieces so that when it comes to tanning, it will be manageable. Then when you cut them, you are also increasing the surface area, which will also help for the materials to decompose within 8 weeks. The next slide. Then the other materials which we need are dry or brown materials. The dry materials are the food source for the microbes, mainly the fungi. Some good examples of dry materials are maize stover. This time around, we are harvesting maize, so those remains, we can use them as dry materials because they've dried naturally. Then we can also use leaves. Very soon we'll be approaching August. A lot of trees will be shedding leaves, so those we can use them as material too. Then straw or grass. We have a lot of grass around, especially elephant grass. We can use that one. Then wood shavings. Then we can also use thatching grass. For example, if you have windsucker and the grass is used up, you want to rethatch, the used thatching grass can be used as compost material. You can also use imipukutu, the remains after you have done the shelling of the maize. Usually when I move around in the villages, people burn, which it's not supposed to be the case because that's material which can be used for making compost. Then seed pods, we will have pods from trees like umutobo, umutondo, umusamba, and many others. Those, we should not burn them. We can also use them in our compost. Then also need wood materials of 3 centimeters in diameter or less, and 10 to 15 centimeters long. So these wood materials will act as ventilators because our compost needs oxygen. So they will provide the spaces through which oxygen will get in and get out of our compost. Then for maize stover or elephant grass, you cut them in small pieces of 10 to 14 centimeters. As you can see, the farmer there, she's cutting the elephant grass into small pieces so that when the compost is made, it becomes easy to do the tanning as well as increase the surface area for decomposition. You can move to the next slide. Then the next material is the nitrogen source, another feed ingredient for the bacteria as they grow in our compost. So the bacteria, in addition to working on the green materials, they also need nitrogen. So the source can come in very different forms. The most easily available to most people is manure, namely cow dung, chicken manure, goat, pig, and sheep. So you can use either. You don't need to have all of them. If you have chicken manure, it's fine, it can be used. If you only have goat manure, that's fine, sheep, pig, or cow manure. So you don't need to have all the 5 in place. 1 is enough, as long as you have the enough quantities. The next slide. So in terms of quantities, if you only have chicken manure, at least 10 bags by 50 kgs, or if it's goat, 10, cow dung, sheep, and pig, the same. Though again here, what will also be paramount is the age of the manure. So I've tried to use 10 as a minimum of what you can organize in readiness to make the compost. The next slide. The next one is water. Water is essential for all life to survive. Our compost is alive and thus needs a lot of water. Water is possibly the most limiting factor in compost production. So the water source, as earlier mentioned, can either be a river, a well, a borehole, or water tap. The reason being that after we have made our heap, when turning, you still need to add water to the compost. That's the more reason why earlier on I mentioned that the compost site should be near a water source, because if it's very far away, when it's turning, it will be laborious. It will be quite involving to be fetching water from some place to where you are making the compost. So it's better the compost site is near the water source, meaning even the materials mentioned earlier, the brown, the green, the manure, should be taken to the site so that during the time of making, you are not making a lot of movements. Next slide. The other material ingredient is oxygen. Thermocomposting is an aerobic process, so the presence of oxygen is necessary. As oxygen is all around us, all we need to do is to ensure that conditions in our compost are suitable for air penetration. And we do this, now that is creating an enabling environment for our oxygen to get in and out. So this is done, 1, not compacting our compost. So as we make the compost, we should not compact it, then ensuring at least 5% of the material is larger than 3 centimeters in size. The wood materials I mentioned, so you need to have a heap so that as you are making, you are adding those pieces so that at the end of the day, they will act as the air vents, the way when bricklayers are building, putting up structures like houses, they always leave room for where to put the air vents. So those wood pieces will act as air vents for our compost. Then the other thing which we do to ensure that we have enough oxygen in our compost heap is turning our compost on time. Then lastly, not adding too much water to our compost. Next slide. Microorganisms is the other ingredients which we need in our compost. All the microbes that we require to create the heat and decompose our compost are already present on the plant materials and manure. So on every surface of the material which we are going to use, these microorganisms are already present there, though we can't see them with our naked eyes. The heat is responsible for killing all the seeds from the materials, especially cow dung. As we know, cow dung usually has a lot of seeds, but because of the heat, a lot of these seeds will be killed. Heat will also eradicate most pathogens that have been introduced from plant residue. This alleviates the risk of reinfecting your next crop with the same disease. And usually temperatures in this compost can be as high as 70 degrees Celsius. So this temperature is enough to take care of the pathogens as well as the seeds. What's important is to do everything on time, especially the turning, ensuring that our compost doesn't lose oxygen. The next slide. Planning of the compost pile. The collection of materials for the compost can be done over a number of weeks or even months. Now, when it comes to compost making and the collection of materials, it should be a way of life. Meaning, every time we are cleaning our yards, we are sweeping, we are pruning, we are weeding, we need to ensure that all the materials are taken to the compost site. No burning. You only burn plastics, which we don't use in our compost, but leaves, grass, even the manure from the crow, from the chicken run, we should ensure that if it means if we sweep every day, the manure should be taken to the compost site, or you feed it in the bags, you keep it somewhere safe, because you need it at the time of making compost. We should move away from the tradition I normally see in the villages, where we allow chickens to be sleeping in the trees. Now, if we are going to embark on compost making, we should ensure that we make chicken runs. Our goats should not be sleeping everywhere nights. Find them, make them a house. Cows, everything should be secured, because we need the compost. Now, since this should be a way of life, it means everything, whatever we do, whatever is not in use, which can decompose, we should ensure that it's taken to the compost site, including kitchen waste. Now, kitchen waste is in many forms, but those things which we know that they will decompose, like remains of vegetables, tomato, onion, if kwangwa mumpoto, remains from the pots we use for cooking in shima, all those should be taken to the compost site and added to the compost at the time of making. It is important to try to keep the different materials separate, as discussed earlier. Green material, when cut, green must be considered green even after it has dried. So meaning those materials which have dried naturally, like this time around, grass, leaves, we heap them in one place, in a separate place. The green materials are also kept separately. The manure is also kept separately. We should not mix them at the time of taking them to the compost site. Next slide. We are continuing with the planning. Once adequate quantities of the three main materials, that's the green, dry, and nitrogen, meaning nitrogen here, we are talking of the manure, have been collected, you are ready to begin. Then, before I go to the next point there, so when you have everything on site, earlier when I talked about the materials, there were 8 poles. They can be the size of insonta or bamboos. So you need to peg them. So you need to find point A, you mark, then you measure 1.5 meters, point B, you mark, then you turn 90 degrees. Again, you measure 1.5 meters, point C, you mark, then you turn 90 degrees, we measure 1.5, point D, you mark. Then you dig holes in those points to a depth of 30 centimeters. Then you fix in the 4 poles. The first 4 poles, you fix them in. So after you have fixed, you will remain with 1.5 on top. So that's what is meant earlier on where I was saying 1.5 by 1.5 by 1.5. So in our planning, I talked on water. So water should always, the compost site should look for where water is. Water is the next resource to arrange and get to the site. Usually you should have brought the plant materials to the water, as they are easier to transport. A drum is ideal for use in drenching your materials. It also helps not to waste water if it is in short supply. Next slide. So now we are ready to go. Construction of the compost pile. So start by placing some wood materials first on the ground. In those days when we were growing up, I used to see mom when cooking fresh fish. She'll get some banana. From the leaves of a banana, there are those stems, the dry ones. She'll cut a few, wash them, put them at the base of the pot before she puts the fresh fish on top. So it's the same concept here. You get a few wood materials, as you can see the 3 gentlemen there. You place them at the bottom. They will act as ventilators, allowing air to get in and out of our compost. Our compost needs air for quick decomposition of our materials. So even when we start building the compost, after a number of layers, we can also throw, and here he said throw in. You can also add a few wood materials. You continue to add the materials. At some stage, you add in the wood materials, which will act as our ventilators. Next slide. We are continuing with the construction. So after placing the wood materials on the ground, you now get the dry or brown materials and immerse them in water. Basically, you are baptizing. So as you can see there is a drum. So you fill that drum with water. Then you start with the dry materials. You immerse them in water. You try as much as possible to put in a lot of brown materials there. They should all be wet. Then you start laying them in that cube we have constructed using the poles. So now you start with the corners. You must ensure that you start putting the materials in the corners and in the sides. Then you end in the middle. Because if you start throwing everything in the middle, you end up with a pyramid. So now the brown materials, the height approximately 20 to 25 centimeters. That is how far you should go for the brown materials. Then do the same with green materials and place them on top of the brown or dry materials. So even in the green materials, same concept, you dip them in water. That's why those who can afford, if you can afford 2 drums, that's even better, because 1 drum, you'll be using it for brown materials, the other drum for green materials. And if you are a number, like you can see there, though only the 4 are appearing in the picture, but there were many who were involved in the compost making there. So everything must be immersed in water, or in short, must be baptized. So care should be taken to ensure that the sides or walls of the pile are straight and vertical. Meaning you fill the whole cube with the brown, the green, but at the end of the day, the sides must be straight. We should end up with a pile which is cubed and not in a pyramid form. The corners must be concentrated on to ensure we don't end up with a pyramid. Because what will happen is, if the shape of our compost at the end of the day is like a pyramid, then we will not get the required temperature for our materials to decompose very quickly. Because when it's in a cube form, the heat which is produced moves in a cycle, of course, which we can't see, but it is highly recommended to ensure that we don't end up with a pyramid, but we have a cube. And there's no need to even what should I say? Maybe put a chukubanga where you tie something around so that the materials don't fall. No. Once you start building it right from the beginning, it's very easy to attain the cube shaped. Next slide. So I talked of the brown material, the green material. Then next is you apply the manure. So the manure should also be wet. Now there are 2 pictures. The first one, there is a boy holding a hose pipe with water coming out, directing the water on a wheelbarrow. So that's where the manure is. That's why I mentioned if you have a wheelbarrow, it will be of handy. So you fill the wheelbarrow with manure, whatever form manure you have. and you add water and you ensure that all the manure is wet. Then you start applying it on top of the green materials, as you can see in the second picture there. I'll give you an illustration of the way we apply butter on a slice of bread. That's the way we should also do our manure. So basically, when we are making composts, when we reach the stage of manure, we say butter. So like it's easy for people to remember what to do because of the butter we apply during breakfast. So after the manure, put the dry or brown material, then green, then manure, and the process continues until you reach 1.5 meters high. So you start with brown, green, manure, brown, green, manure, brown, green, manure, until you reach at the top of the poles which have been fixed in the ground. Next slide. So the construction is done. As you can see in the picture, the pile has been made and it's in a cube form. It's standing, there's no need to tie around anything. So if you have reached that point, then the compost has been done. Next slide. Before we come to this one, Madam Kalinda, can we go back? Yeah. In that short video, we saw that girl pulling the load. So after making the compost, now you take that 1.2 meters load and you insert it in the compost. Because of our agriculture industry is still developing. In the developed world, there are thermometers which have been designed for use in compost making. But in our case, we use that metal rod or wire for checking how hot. Of course, it will not measure the temperature, but it will give us a guide. If it's heating up, we know that our compost has the right conditions. If it's not heating up, then we need to do some troubleshooting. So inserting that load in the compost, then after 2 days, we go and check if our compost is heating up. So you pull the metal rod from the compost, and you touch the part which was inside the compost. But care should be taken when touching. You must be cautious. As I mentioned, temperatures can go as high as 70 degrees Celsius. So once you have checked, by the second day to start heating up, you push it back. The third day, again, you go back, pull it, touch on it, just to ensure that our compost is heating up. So the construction is done. The next slide. So after we have done the construction, there comes now turning. Now, on the tools, I talked of you having 8 poles. So in making, we'll use the first 4. The other 4 will come and also insert them in the ground next to the first one, but we leave a space of 50 centimeters in between the first site. Then the second one, we'll also do the same. We do the markings, measuring 1.5 by 1.5 on all sides, including the height. We've set them in. So then we'll be turning our compost every week. So 7 days from the day we made the compost, we must turn it, meaning we must move it to the next, I'll call it box. It's more or less like a box. So you move it there. So you start moving the materials which are on top. So here, normally we use the garden fork, and because of the height, you may be required to climb on top of the compost and then start moving the materials which are on top. So after 8 weeks, the compost will be ready. Now, on top there is saying every week for 7 to 8 weeks, we do the turning. So if we make the compost, for example, today is Thursday, we've made our compost. Next week, Thursday or Friday, we turn it. The other week, Thursday or Friday, we turn it. So every 7 days, we must turn our compost. So if we decide to just make one, then it means the second turn, we'll move it back to the original place where we started from. Then the third, we take it in the other box. The fourth, we bring it to the first box. This is a situation where you've decided to make one. Now, if you're going to make a number of heaps, if you want a lot of compost, then it means you need to make like a line, like a conveyor belt. It means you need to find more poles. Then you need to have 7 or 8, I will call them boxes. You fix the poles for 8 positions so that you are, every week you turn, you move to from the first to the second, third, until the 8th or 7th. So that, for example, if today we have made, next week we turn. We can also make from the first one, because we have created space. So we can make another one. We have turned the first one, we make the second one. So the third week, we'll turn the first one for the second time. Then the second compost will be turned for the first time. Then you'll have created space in the first box. You can make another one. So as you are turning, you are also making. You are turning, you are also making. So that at the end of the year, you will have enough compost to apply in the orchard, including the garden or maize growing. Next slide. So how to turn? Press the cool materials from the outside of the pile into the center of the new pile as we rebuild it, and the hot material from the center to the outside. So I earlier mentioned that when turning, you start with the materials which is on top. You just start moving now. You are pushing the materials which is on top in the next pile or box. Then you also ensure that the materials which is on the sides, because by the 7th day, the materials which are outside on top would have dried because of the sun and the wind blowing. So the materials on top and in the sides, you try by all means to push them in the middle. Then you are also adding water. Then the materials which are in the middle, you push them now on the outside. As you can see, on the right there's that compost which was tanned. You can see on the left, it's still looking dry. There are two composts there. There's one on the left, which is looking dry. It has not been tanned. The one on the right was just tanned. So you can see that the materials which were in the middle, as much as possible, they were put on the outside so that all the materials by the 8th week will have decomposed. So it's even in the next 10, you do the same. The materials on top, you start from there. The ones in the sides, you throw in the middle. The ones which are in the middle are put on the outside until the compost is ready. Next slide. Importance of tanning. It stops the pile from overheating. Then secondly, it resupplies the pile with oxygen. Then it allows for more moisture to be added. The outside or untreated materials will be moved to the center. So if we don't tan, our compost might overheat and kill our beneficial bacteria. So we need to tan. It's a way of controlling the temperatures. Then as we tan, we are introducing more oxygen. More air is getting in. We've made the materials loose, because as the compost starts to decompose, it starts coming down, materials start compacting. So when we do the tanning, we make them loose, more air gets in, and it starts to heat again. Then at the point of tanning, we still add water, because the materials which were on top and in the sides, by the 7th day would have dried up. So we need to add water. As I mentioned, water is life. Then it also helps that all the materials at the end of the 8th week will have decomposed. Next slide. Yeah, if we don't tan, I might have mentioned some of the points there. If we don't tan our compost, the result will be that our compost may overheat and kill our beneficial bacteria. Our compost may run out of oxygen and go anaerobic, which means it will still be decomposing, but the process will be slowed because there is no oxygen added. Then the compost may also run out of moisture and cool down too soon. So here we want to ensure that we have created the enabling environment. One, we control the temperature by tanning. Then we introduce more oxygen as we tan, because if oxygen runs out, then it will be anaerobic. The process will be slowed down. Instead of taking 8 weeks for a compost to be ready, it will take 9 to 12 months for it to completely decompose because there's no oxygen there. Then moisture also helps to create the environment for bacteria and fungi to multiply. As they multiply, they feed, they produce the heat. Next slide. So after 8 weeks, our compost is ready. If you see the picture on the right or both, the materials have decomposed. Even we can see the height of the pores to where the compost has remained. The decomposition has taken place, everything has decomposed, and our compost is ready. We can, after the compost is ready, we can either pack it in empty bags, like the 50 kg bags we use for maize. We can pack it there, take it in the shed, or if we have no immediate use, of course, we can remove the compost from the last box. Maybe we put it on the side and cover dry grass on top of it. This will allow the earthworms to get into our compost and other bacteria and soil life, which is in the soil, to get into our compost and start breaking down the compost further so that now the nutrients will be ready for our plants. So that will be a situation where we don't have the immediate use of the compost. We want more soil life, especially the earthworms, to get into the compost and break it down further. In this case, our earthworms will act like enzymes in the human body, the GIT. The enzymes work on the food for the system to assimilate it. So even here, the worms will help to break down our compost further so that now the nutrients will be readily available for our plants and our trees. Next slide. Conclusion. There is a quotation there from Jeff Lawton. Nature demands a gift for everything it gives. So what we have to keep doing is returning leaves and compost materials back to the soil. Then we have continuously giving gifts to nature because we have a return cycle. So now when Adam and Eve were told to take care of the garden, it also included the soil life, the termites, the worms, the bacteria and the fungi which are in the soil. So if we take care of them, they will provide the nutrients for our plants and our trees. As you can see, the picture on top there is maize grown with compost as basal dressing and urea as top dressing. That's at the farm of Mr. Excuse me, Mr. and Mrs. Nyerenda of Chamakubi. This is a place as you go to Solwezi after Chingola. Then the picture at the bottom is one of the trees from our orchard in Mpongwe. In both situations, compost is used. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chibesa. Wow, this is quite interesting. I did not realize it will only take 8 weeks. So I can get rid of all my weeds in 8 weeks if I compost them.
Yes, you can.
Thank you. We've got a few questions, and as usual, Vesa's on a roll. She's put quite a few questions here. So her first question is, what did she say? as one needs 500 kg of manure, I'm assuming it's fine to be a mix of different manures and make up the 500 kg. Can we use different manures in terms of cow manure and chicken manure all in one pile?
Yeah, if we have, we can mix, but if we don't have all the 5 at once, we only have chicken, it's fine, we can just use one. But if one is fortunate, they can use what they have, they can still mix.
Okay, thank you very much. We've got a question here from Roy. Thank you very much, Roy. It says, the picture of turning the compost, I can't help but assume that it may seep off the pile. Is this possible? Further, can a pallet-like box be used for better efficiency?
There's no speeding when turning.
Okay.
So there's I don't see the need to have pallets. It's okay from the theoretical point of view. It might not seem practical, but once we are on the ground and it's done, the material doesn't fall apart. I hope I've answered the question.
Yes, and you did mention that you mix from outward to inside to the center, isn't it?
Yes.
So I'm assuming that's part of it. Okay, thank you, sir. And then the next question, Bessa says, I'm assuming after decomposition, the pile may be lower than 1.5 meters high. Roughly how many 50 kg bags of compost could one expect from the initial 1.3 heap? Oh, sorry, 1.5 heap, sorry.
Okay, there again, what it might not be, what do they call it, rule of thumb. It depends on the material used, because if you are going to use, I'll give an example of neem leaves. Neem leaves are very, one, they are small, and they are smooth, they are not brittle and soft. But when you use, for example, mango, avocado, these are, they are not soft, they are quite hard. So as to come up with the exact numbers of what one expects will depend, will be, it will depend from heap to heap and the materials used. But roughly around the 10, between 5 and 15 bags can be harvested from the compost pile. But what is paramount is the materials used.
Thank you, sir. Vesa says, is adding worms to the heap a good idea? If so, when would one add them?
Adding worms?
Yes, sir.
It's after 8 weeks, after the compost is ready. That's when now you can add in worms to help now break down the compost further. So once the compost is ready, that's when you can add worms there.
Thank you so much, sir. We've got a question here from Mr. Brian. He says, how do the aerobic and the anaerobic compost making process compare to each other in terms of richness?
The aerobic will be more richer than the anaerobic. The difference is the materials we are going to add and the tanning, because the aerobic one, you are going to have more bacteria, more fungi. Then there are also other soil insects, like you also notice that what is this insect which troubles us in the house? Cockroaches.
Yes.
Cockroaches will also be found in the compost heap. Probably that's the reason why we have more cockroaches in the homes, because we are not composting.
Okay, they don't die from the heat.
There is a stage when they will come in. Nature is, I like learning lessons from nature. Nature, other animal life respects God's laws and principles, unlike man. Man is quite complex. So the cockroaches will come in, a lot of other insects which will not survive in the anaerobic. Now, the anaerobic, as I mentioned, this is where we dig umuganda. We dig a pit, throw in the materials, basically, there's no mathematics there in the anaerobic, where we dig the pit and throw in the materials. After the pit is full, we cover it with the soil. So some of the insects will not get into the pit because we've already covered it. But the aerobic one, since it's on top of the surface, a number of, I would say, soil life, because if I say insects, I will be limiting. A number of soil life, meaning bacteria, fungi, and insects, will come into our compost. And each one has a role to play there. There's what they call the food web. But I will share more details in the other presentation on the uses and benefits of compost. But the aerobic one will be richer because of the animal life, the soil life, which will get in, and each one playing its part.
Thank you, sir. Perfect. We've got another question from, let me see, this is Vesa. How long does the compost remain effective after the 8 weeks? Does it have a use by date?
No, it doesn't have a use by date. You can keep it as long as, okay, if you are going to keep it for a longer time, then you put it in the bags and you put in the storeroom, or where at least is safe from rainwater. You don't leave it in the field for long, probably even during the rain season. Because what will happen is, if you leave it in the open, rains come. There's what they call leaching. You lose the nutrients. So the best, if you're going to leave it in the field for the purposes of worms getting in, but it should not be in the rainy season. Because in the rainy season, because of too much moisture, too much rainwater, we can lose the nutrients through the process called leaching. But you can put it in the bags and put it safe. Probably with compost and like other synthetic fertilizers, the longer it takes, probably with the introduction of worms, the richer it even becomes.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, sir. And then Abel has asked, can one plant a tree directly in the compost without mixing with soil?
Well,
good question.
good Good question. No. We need the soil. The soil will provide the anchorage of the roots. So we need the mixture. We need to mix, because the compost, ultimately, we are just making use of the leaves, the grass, and the manure, which is usually light. But we need the soil, because the soil has a role to play when it comes to plant life. So the plants or the trees, they need anchorage. So hence the importance of adding soil with compost. Then we use it to fill our planting hole.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, sir. Now, Chilubi has asked, how much manure do you use per pile? Okay.
Again, there, I talked of 10 bags of each as a minimum, but the heights of those heaps, the green, the brown, will determine how much manure you are going to use. For example, we use for every application of manure, we use 2 wheelbarrows. So fill in an wheelbarrow, mix with water, apply. If we have 2 wheelbarrows, we'll mix at the same time and apply water. It makes life easy. So at every stage of brown-green manure, brown-green manure. Now, the height of the heaps will determine how much manure you are going to use. So it also depends on, again, the materials being used. Because what happens is quite interesting. As you are building, Kaidi, we normally look forward to finishing. As you are building, you'll be finishing very, very soon. But it will start, it will be compacting itself, because we are putting everything as water. So as we put more manure on top, it's more or less like compacting itself. So if you can have 10 bags, a few quantities might remain at the end of the day. But what is important is the height. Then, of course, also the age of the manure. At times when you are using very old manure, you might need to even use more, because the nitrogen content has been reached, because you are using old manure. But if you are using fresh manure, from the 10 bags, you can even remain with a balance. But it's all as we need to play around with the materials we are using. So the best for us farmers, what I've learned is that if it's possible, we have a few animals or chickens, and ensure that the manure, we treat manure as gold, mineral gold.
That's a good one.
Then it's going to be very easy to make our compost. But if we are going to be buying manure from other farmers, then it's going to be quite a challenge in terms of cash as well as transportation. But the best, especially us fruit farmers and avocado in particular, let's ensure that we have a few animals around, because day by day, as you collect the manure, you are going to have enough in no time. Yes.
Okay. Now, the last question, I think, is how much manure do you use per pile? Oh, you've already answered this question, I think. So there's one more question from Bessa. Please clarify on green versus dry leaves, as classified as green or as dry. I thought you said it's considered green if it's been cut green. So is it that unless it's dried that it's added on the heap? So she just needs some clarity on that one.
Okay. Green materials, that is, we have an avocado tree with leaves on it. Then we do the pruning, where we cut some. So as we cut them, that is what we are calling green material. Anything fresh from the tree or the grass. Now, usually when we do the pruning, we will not probably right away go and make the compost. We'll take it to the compost heap. But because we have cut it from the water source, the leaves will dry. But in compost making, those leaves will still be considered as green material. Because at the time of cutting, they were green, and in the leaves have the sugar remains. You know that photosynthesis business.
Yes.
So the leaves will have the sugars, the carbohydrates. But at the point of making compost, they've dried. So we'll still consider them as green material.
I see.
Then what we are considering as brown material, it's leaves, grass, the maize stover, which have dried through the natural process. And then we have the leaves on the trees. They've done their work. They've been retired. They drop to the ground. Because what happens is, the science there is this. When the leaf has performed its duty, it has reached retirement age, the tree is going to withdraw any excess sugars from that leaf.
Yes.
The tree will sorry for that, Ben.
It's okay.
This leaf has reached retirement age. It has worked its purpose. So the tree is going to reclaim whatever balance is there for the distribution to other parts. Then that leaf will drop to the ground. That is what we are calling the brownie material. Same applies with grass. In the field this time around, the grasses are drying. So the nutrients are going down for storage somewhere. So those are the brown or dry materials, the leaves of grass which have dried through the natural process.
I see. So Chilubi is just asking here. She says, is brown the last thing you add on top? I think when you mentioned something about putting grass on top after it's composed, or is it just layers? So she's asking, is it the last thing you put on top?
Yeah, usually brown is the last thing we'll put on top. So we are building. At the last layer, we put brown materials. Then maybe I can also mention that compost making, you can make it throughout the year, as long as you have the materials. But in the rainy season, because of too much moisture, too much rainwater, what you can do is, if you have a tent, which you can cut 1.5 by 1.5, then you tie on the ends, then you tie to the poles. Or you can also use those black plastics, anything plastic. Or if you don't have, the beauty with compost is that you also play with what you have. You can also use green leaves of bananas. You put them on top, so that more or less like you are roofing. At the end of the day, you don't have excess water getting into the compost from the top. So you can do some covering. But when turning, of course, you remove, you do the turning, then you cover so that the compost is not too wet as a result of rainwater.
Okay. Well, on the same topic, Sam has asked an interesting question. She says, he says, sorry, can one pour warm water to enhance the process?
Using warm water when making?
Yes.
No.
Okay, why?
We just use cold water. What will happen is that the heat comes from the multiplication of bacteria and fungi. I'll give an example of in town. In town, it's quite warm because there are a lot of activities, there's population is high, a lot of cooking going on, automobiles moving, industries. So even in terms of temperatures, it's different from the country or in the village, because there's very little activities going on, and usually there it's quite cold when it comes to winter. So now in our compost, the multiplication, is it what? I think it's still multiplication. The increase, the bacteria will increase in number. There will be a lot of bacteria reproduction. Yeah, that's a good term. There's a lot of reproduction of bacteria and fungi. And through that process of reproduction, because they are also feeding, that's where the heat comes from. So there is no need to burn more fuel to warm the water.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. That was our last question. I'll just have a quick look at the WhatsApp chat. I don't think we have any other questions on that one. Mr. Chibesa, thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. I appreciate it. And I'm sure we have all learned a lot today. One of the other things I wanted to bring up was you will be talking to us on other topics regarding composting. From what I've seen here on my list, you'll be talking to us about making compost part 2. And this is why something to do with compost and synthetic fertilizers. I'm sorry, I cannot pronounce that. So we look forward to that. And then you've got a third one, which is human health benefits. So we look forward to hearing about all the other types of composting. But before you go, sir, you mentioned something about what you are doing, and you mentioned about ZRA and other things. Was there anything else of interest on your farm that you'd like our listeners to know?
Well, apart from before I forget, I'm also grateful for this opportunity to share. I also want to thank your team and everyone involved in the training, because knowledge is a differentiator. Then I'm glad that I'm part of the cooperative. We have learned a lot as a family from past presentations. It has been exciting. We've had gaps in our farming endeavors as well, which through your trainings, a lot of gaps have been filled up. Now, before we went into full-time farming, as I mentioned, when I left the university, I joined the ZRA as a tax inspector. I worked there for 2 contracts. Now, what I discovered was that by that time, I also started farming, though at weekend basis. But ZRA work started interfering with the farming enterprise. So I decided to leave. But we went also into tax consultants. helping the business community appreciate the tax part of life.
So we can come to you for our taxes?
Yeah, you are welcome, because they say, I love one man, how he defined the tax. He said the tax is the price you pay for making money. This year we are talking about big money.
Yes, we are. Yes, we are.
We are talking about big money, and it's going to attract ZRA. So it will be very important to appreciate the basics of tax, so that whoever is going to business starts on a right footing. Then at our farm, we are into agroforestry, meaning we have combined fruit tree farming. Though we started with citrus, that's what we have. We have 1 hectare of citrus. We lost 2 hectares through fire. By that time, we are weekend farmers. But we are trying to replant. We are replanting 1 hectare with mixed fruits, because we believe fruit trees gives the best food security. So we have, in this 1 hectare, we have guavas, pawpaws, mangoes, basically changanya.
Okay.
Then after joining the avocado business, we have started now land preparation. We are also intending to put up, for a start, 1 hectare of avocados. But why agroforestry? Agroforestry is very exciting, because we don't need to look to the neighbors like Ukraine, Russia, or China for your inputs in the farm. Everything can be done from the farm. So we are into citrus. We've been in citrus for 17 years now. We have also started goats, because goats supply us with the manure. Then when we prune the trees, we feed the goats. Then the goats supply the manure we make compost, and we feed the trees.
Wow.
Then we're also into beekeeping, because we need bees, because citrus is not self-pollinated, so we need bees. So we are into beekeeping. Then we also, because the Lord says, freely you received, freely you give, though freely giving at a minimal cost. We also do training. We help especially small-scale farmers, how to make compost and use compost. Like the last, on the conclusion, the picture on top there of Mr. and Mrs. Nyerenda.
Yes.
In the past, they were harvesting 5 to 6 bags from a tulima for almost 20 years. That was the maximum they can produce from a tulima. In 2019, when we introduced them to compost, they were able to harvest 56 by 60 kgs of maize from a tulima, just from compost. So we are also helping people to improve their food security. Then lastly, my wife also does what she calls lifestyle counseling. Friends who have these NCDs, diabetes, cancer, and many others, she helps them to understand the cause and what can be done to minimize the impact of those deadly diseases. So basically, that's what we are doing for survival.
Wow, thank you so much. I like the ecosystem you've created there and the dependency on different things that you've got on the farm. That would be quite interesting to see if it can actually, you can actually add cover crops in there somehow, so that it can complement income while you're waiting for the avocados to get ready. But thank you so much. I appreciate it. And I'm sure you'll get a lot of questions. For those of you who are still on the call, I have sent his presentation to the Telegram group. So please feel free to download it and have a look at that. And we look forward to seeing you next week again. Thank you so much, Mr. Chibesa. I appreciate you having to come in today. Thank you so much.
Okay.
I have ended the live stream.